Welcome. This is our second outreach meeting. It's our Community and Urban Garden Seminar. These meetings are underwritten by a grant from NRCS and done in conjunction with Vivian B. Adams School. Our intent and purpose of our grant is to provide information so that we can begin having community and urban gardens in our area and give you all the information you need to make that happen. During these uncharted and unnavigated times and waters, we find ourselves socially isolated. So this is a great time to gather information, to put your skills to practice in your own backyard, to take the information that's offered to us by these professionals today and prepare yourself to do gardens of your own. Prepare yourself then. Maybe this fall we can come together. We can share our experiences, share our information, share our knowledge, and we can begin to build some of those gardens that maybe right now we're beginning to see are very essential to our food supply in the future.
Hi, I'm James Currington with the Natural Resource Conservation Service ACES program. The Natural Resource Conservation Service is an agency created through USDA to assist farmers, ranchers, and growers with conservation activity on their land and property. The ACES program was created to assist Natural Resource Conservation Service with delivery of their programs and activities through older workers' career centers. The Natural Resource Conservation Service provides funding and assistance to assist landowners with conservation activities such as fencing, cross fencing, watering trough, livestock, anything to do with livestock. Also, they provide funding to do with small growers on activities such as tunnel houses, garden, community type garden, and they also provide funding. They also help large growers with conservation practice such as cotton, corn, and peanut with the Vivian B. Adams School to discuss and talk about different aspects of what NRCS does. We also provide education, training to also help producers become more familiar and more productive in the way that they carry on their business. And whether you're just getting started up or you've been farming for the last 20 years, we try to assist you and make your operation better.
This is David Koon. I'm a regional extension agent with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. Today we're going to talk a little bit about gardening and raised beds and containers. And we're going to cover some of the basics and different sizes and why you do these. What is raised bed gardening? Well, simply is a form of gardening in which the soil is formed in a 3 to 4 foot bed, which can vary in length or shape. The soil is raised above the surrounding soil approximately 6 inches to waist high, sometimes enclosed by a frame, generally made of wood, rock, or concrete blocks. And we're going to enrich that soil with compost. And generally, while we're doing a raised bed, is we're trying to change the soil makeup so that it drains better and it's a better growing media for what we're trying to grow, or simply use the space we have better. Again, it maximizes the available space. It's a convenient option in areas with limited space or areas with poor or rocky soil or sloped terrains. We can take an area that's a drainage problem and create some raised beds and make it an attractive part of our landscape, being able to use it all while preventing that erosion problem. It uses high quality soil mixes with large amounts of organic matter, something lacking in our normal soils, and may increase yields. Some other advantages: soil above ground tends to drain better and warms up faster in the spring, and it allows for a little faster seed germination and transplant growth. Higher soil levels and improved soil quality equal better access and less maintenance, much easier to harvest. We can grow a little bit more in it because we can plant it a little denser and result in a little higher production per square foot. We can also have a little better control over weed seed germination. They can be entered and maintained soon after a rain or irrigation without compacting the soil because we're not walking on it. It doesn't have to be all the way drained. And once it's rained, we can immediately get back out there and work in it because, again, we're just simply reaching into the bed. We're not walking around in the bed. And they can be an attractive addition to your landscape, something to be proud of, and that can be a focal point in your. Some disadvantages: raised beds do tend to dry out a little more quickly in the hot summer months. As we talk dimensions, if you're growing throughout the summer months, I would make my bed a little deeper than if I'm just growing a spring or a fall garden. Frame and soil can be a little expensive and hard labor intensive to create. Limited crop rotation means we're growing some of the same crops in the same areas, so we can increase disease pressure at times. So sanitation is important as we go through our raised beds. Increased plant density also means we're creating a little bit of a smorgasbord sometimes for our insect pressure. It's all in one place and can lead to insects congregating or disease starting faster. And it's not well suited for some of our larger sprawling vegetables like watermelons and sweet potatoes. Dimensions: height, usually a minimum of 8 to 12 inches is needed for proper root development. And again, if we're growing summer vegetables, I would make sure I create my bed a little deeper on the 12-inch side. And if we're just doing fall and spring gardens, the 6 to 8 inches is perfectly fine. Width, 4 feet is about ideal. What we're trying to do is create something we can reach at least halfway across, so we don't have to enter that raised bed to do maintenance, planting, or anything else in our garden. And length can be as long or as short as you want it. 4 feet to 12 feet, anywhere in there works fine. So when we're constructing a raised bed, we simply need a couple of things: a frame to hold the soil and a growing media. Pretty as elaborate as you'd like, or simply without a frame, we're creating a raised area or mounding a bed that we're going to plant in. Pressure treated lumber and planks. We always get questions about safety of pressure treated lumber, and today's pressure treated lumber is perfectly fine to grow vegetables in. The older pressure treated lumber from 30 or 40 years ago had arsenic in it, so we don't want to use that if you have any old pressure treated wood. But today's pressure treated wood, new pressure treated wood, is fine to use for your raised beds. Lots of different options: landscape timbers, rocks, railroad ties, stone, old tires, retaining wall block. Anything that's creative that you want to use is perfectly fine. As we get more elaborate, the cost increases. So pressure treated planks, you can get the frame material for about $25 to $38 depending on the size. You can go all the way up to $300 if you're using block or stone type walls. Growing media, topsoil is best. And we need to make sure we amend that topsoil if we're putting it in there. Try to stay away from using the native soil. That's part of the reason we're putting a bed in most times, is to change the soil makeup to make it better for growing. We're going to add some soil conditioner, some fine pine bark mulch or something to it, some compost or humus. Mushroom compost works wonderfully. Add some peat moss in is fine. Make sure you moisten that peat moss before you incorporate it into the soil. It has a hard time getting wet if you put it in there extremely dry. Composted manures are fine. Be cautious on putting too much in, and also be cautious about what you're bringing in with that composted manures. You know, animals eat seeds and they tend to come out in the waste. So if you're concerned about some of your composted manures, you can simply put some of those in a planting flat, water them, set them out in the sun, and wait a week or two, and see what they germinate. Pre-packed mixes are fine and typically are a neutral pH when you get them, but they are a little more expensive. As we talk about expense, soil media expenses, simple bulk topsoil runs about 75 cents a cubic foot, all the way up to peat moss at $5 a bag. So again, you can be as frugal or as elaborate as you want in your growing material, but we're just trying to create a good, rich growing medium when we install that bed. Total expenses, you can go anywhere from $270 all the way up to $500, just depending on what you choose to add to your bed. Installation, typically we would like to rough up the ground with a shovel or a tiller up under that bed to ensure proper drainage. Don't add plastic or other barriers on the ground to serve as a bottom of the frame. A lot of times we create a bathtub effect that holds too much moisture, and we have some root rot problems if we do that. Place or build the frame on the selected site. Level the frame. Large wood screws are recommended over nails. And another trick, when you buy, if you're using lumber, buy your lumber right before you're going to construct your bed. If you buy that treated lumber a month or two ahead and let it sit out in the sun and it dries, it becomes much harder and much more difficult to get those screws through. So wait till right before you're going to buy that bed. It tends to be a little greener, a little softer, and easier to build. You want to add your new growing media to complete the frame. Mix in additional amendments as needed. Again, adding native soil is usually not recommended because it duplicates some of the problems we're trying to get rid of at that site. Poor soil drainage or nematode or soil diseases, and it kind of defeats the purpose of building a raised bed. When we're adding our soil, we want to add in about a half a cup of dolomitic limestone per cubic foot of growing media, and what we're trying to do is just raise the pH. Generally, most of our soils here in the south are acidic because of the amount of rain we have. So adding a half cup per cubic foot helps us combat that when we're building our beds. And it's much easier to change that soil pH as we're adding the soil instead of from the top putting it on after. So we're going to add it and mix it in good with the soil. Planting techniques, a lot of different options for those raised beds. A typical 4x4 bed with 12-inch spacings, and you can plant 16 potatoes or 16 larger vegetables like squash or tomatoes. Use a little more space, so as you get a larger vegetable, you reduce the number that can be planted in that bed. And conversely, when you go smaller, you get more in that bed. And it doesn't have to be all the soil. You can change those around so you have 2 tomatoes, a couple of squash, and some smaller vegetables in there also. Container, a little bit about container gardening. Why will we container garden? Some of the same reasons we're going to do raised beds. We may have limited space, limited mobility, don't have access to a good site. A good one is confined invasives. We want to plant something that is very invasive when it gets out in the environment, but we can put it in a container and keep it there, and we don't have to constantly weed it or keep it out of our landscape. Biggest disadvantages, water and fertilizer requirements go up a little bit in those smaller containers. Choosing a container, just like our raised beds, be creative. You can use clay pots, plastic pots. You see here a wagon we've converted into a container, some small raised beds that go on our back deck, and a neat little bicycle that the baskets have been changed into planters on. Tips for choosing a container: must have a bottom hole for adequate drainage, must be large enough to hold the minimum amount of media for the mature plants. Make sure the pot fits the size of the mature plant. Type of pot depends on location. We want to avoid black containers here in the south. They tend to heat up extremely hot during the summer months. And remember, porous materials like clay, they wick moisture, so keep that in mind as you're planting those. And again, decide if the container needs to be attractive. What's the purpose? Are we trying to enhance our landscape, or are we simply wanting to grow some patio tomatoes in our container? Coordinate the color with plant materials. A lot of times that helps. Paint to create a different look, cooler surface. Consider weight, especially if you're going to be moving that container in and out of the house. You don't have to fill those containers all the way up with soil. Just like our raised beds, we want an 8 to 12 inch root zone, but if it's deeper than that, we can simply line the bottom with styrofoam peanuts, old water bottles, anything to take up that space that's lighter and easier to move around, so we don't have to fill it completely with soil. Potting mixtures must keep containers moist but well drained. Soilless mixtures are best. Typically they're free of disease, insect, and weed seeds. They're light, very porous. You can create your own mix: peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, sterile potting mixture, compost, and some coarse builder's sand. If you're creating your own mix, it's a good idea to take a sample when you get through that mix and send it to the lab, and they can tell you the pH and whether or not you need to adjust it. Selecting plants, a lot of options here: annual bedding plants, herbaceous perennials, bulbs, vegetables and fruits, woody plants, water garden plants, all work well in containers and raised beds. Most vegetables are grown in a particular season, making them great for container plants. Select more compact varieties of those plants. If you're using something that sprawls, the smaller varieties do much better. Must plant in a proper size container and keep them watered. So a tomato or a squash needs to go in at least a 5-gallon type container, where a lettuce or a radish can go down to a 1-gallon type container. Some good varieties of tomatoes for hanging baskets listed here: Florida basket, Florida gold basket. Some squash varieties that work good: Dixie, Sundrop, Elite. All work good in our containers. Cucumbers, peppers, snap beans, carrots all work well in containers. And here you see some listed varieties that do well in those smaller spaces. Mixed containers, you can incorporate vegetables with your herbs and your annuals and vines. Just make sure they have the same light and water requirements, so you're not having to water part of the container different or move that container around to get more sun. Consider plant colors, textures, variety, height, and flow, just like a normal container. You want a thriller, a spiller, and a filler. That same thing goes if you're adding vegetables into the mix. One of those can be your filler or your spiller or your thriller, but just consider textures, plant height, and flow when you choose those. Again, always start with healthy, pest-free plants. You want to make sure you inspect them well at the store. If it's ugly at the store, it's going to be ugly at home. If it's got insects or disease at the store, you're bringing those home with you. So select good quality, fresh plants and make sure there's no issues with them. First you want to do is determine how the plants will be arranged in the container. You can cover the drainage hole at the bottom with a small screen or something, just to keep that initial material from falling out as you start filling it. You want to fill the container about 3/4 full. Moisten the potting mix thoroughly, allow it to settle, add a little more media if needed. Then we're going to remove the plants from the container before planting. Make sure we don't have to do any roughing up of the roots if they're root bound or anything like that. If soilless mixes do not contain fertilizer, add a slow release fertilizer mix, and you may need to supplement with a water soluble fertilizer. And again, anytime you're using a fertilizer, especially water soluble, you want to follow the directions on those items. Watering is the most critical and time-consuming part of container garden. Again, they're going to dry out a little faster, so you have to commit that time to go out there every day in the middle of the summer, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day if it's in a real high heat area. Um, watering time can be reduced by installing some drip irrigation and an automatic timer on those. Very handy, very easy to install. Container plants typically need a little more winter protection. They're going to freeze a little faster, and you can put wind screens or put the container in the ground or move the container to a protected area during those times. If you're using vining plants, they're going to require staking or trussing. Anchor those containers to prevent the wind from blowing them over. And when we reuse our containers, we want to clean those containers with a 10% bleach solution before use, and it just kills pests and removes fertilizer salts from that container. If it's a porous container like a clay pot, we want to soak that in water prior to planting just to make sure it doesn't wick the initial soil moisture out of the soil. Again, if it's a big container, we don't need that full container. For growing media, we can fill the bottom with styrofoam peanuts or any filler type material. We've seen old water bottles used, or anything that basically fills that space and the soil can lay on top of. If we're planting newly propagated plants, take your time as you're moving them from their nice, safe environment of a inside starting to a outside environment. We're going to harden those off a few days or 3 or 4 days before we actually put them in the container and put them out in the wild. You want those containers elevated just a little bit so that drain hole works. You don't want that drain hole up against the concrete where it can get stopped up and not drain.
One of the things that we are concentrating on, and Ms. Owens will talk with you more about this, is we have developed, Mr. Koon and I have developed a raised bed that can grow almost like a townhouse. And I'm going to show you some quick pictures here of this. And if you go to Adams School, you'll be able to see it. They got one behind the school where they got 2 townhouses, and through Miss Owens she can tell you better how they're using it and what they're doing with the townhouses. So I'm going to more focus on what we're trying to do with the new bed that we're trying to use. Okay, very quickly I'm going to show you some pictures of the raised bed that Professor Koon and I are working on. My brother assisted me with the production of the first one along with Mr. Koon. This is the way the townhouse look, and you can see right now we're starting with a wooden frame, but we also looking to turn that into aluminum and other forms of development. Now if you look here at the one right here, and I'm going to show these pictures very quickly, you can see where the framing is made of wood. You also have here at the bottom that it will have a silk screen on the inside. And the makeup of this townhouse will be more or less screen and fencing to form the bed area. And one of the things that we totally encourage is that you're actually going to have a makeup of 3 types of soil that you will put in there. That will be gravel, sand, and then organic material on the top. And as you look here, this was actually the very first bed we did. This is the planting of the very first bed. And it was at the end of the season, so we didn't have a lot of good plants to use, but you can see how they turn out here at the end. Now this is the makeup of the townhouse. If you look here, you're going to have actually the plastic, the greenhouse plastic on the top. Here, each screen will be able to drop down that you can keep all of the insects out. And after that screen, you'll be able to drop down with the plastic that will be used in the wintertime to keep out the cold weather. So you actually have the screening around it that actually help with the insect control, and the other plastic will drop down, and all of this rolls up and down. And we'll also be having classes in the future on how to develop one of these, how to make one. And again, this is just the framing with it being completed. And this is actually some of the crops that was grown in there. You can see what the crops look like from the picture I showed earlier before we started, how much they grown and how healthy they look. And you don't see a lot of holes in the leaves because we got the screen around it. Again, this is another picture of it. And it takes low maintenance to, take care of it and produce it. But the key to it is, number one, is making sure that you got the makeup of everything that we talked about. And soil health is really the key to it. And you would irrigate with drip line irrigation on the inside. So we want to talk a little bit more maybe about what they do with the one at the school. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Owens, and thank you for participating in this broadcast with us. And it's the first time we did this, and hopefully we can do some more in the future. And again, I appreciate your time and thoughts. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lucy Edwards with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. Today we're going to go over the basic steps for taking a soil sample. When you have a raised bed garden, a lot of times you're going to have high organic material in your raised bed. So this will not be a routine soil test. This will be run as what they consider a saturated paste test to analyze that high organic matter. It will still give you results for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and then if you want additional micronutrients, it can also tell you that as well. So a few things that you will need when you take a soil sample. First, you'll need a container. So this is just an old pot lying around. You can use anything, just something to hold the soil. If you have a soil probe, you can use a soil probe. But most of us probably have a handy trowel lying around, and so that's what we'll use today. Within this raised bed, I'm going to take a couple of different sub-samples, mix them together in my bucket, and then lastly, I will combine them in a Ziploc bag, because this is about as much soil as you need. And then we'll place the soil in our box, and then we'll fill out the soil form that goes with each sample. Now each form you can do up to 5 samples, so you don't necessarily need a form for each box. You could use 5 different soil boxes to go with one form. Some people will ask, well, do I need a separate soil sample for each raised bed? My response to that would be, if you can tell a major difference in your growing conditions, so like if this bed grew really well but the one beside it grew poorly, I would probably do 2 separate samples. Now if they're both having similar yields, then I would only take 1 sample, and what I would probably do is when I'm taking my sub-samples, I would take half from this bed and half from that bed. So we're going to begin sampling this bed. We're going to take sub-samples about 4 inches deep, and we're going to take them from different parts of this bed. Then we're going to mix this sample together. That way it's a blended representation of our bed. We're going to take our Ziploc bag. We're going to fill it most of the way up. This is about halfway, and that's okay. The reason why we use a bag before putting it inside the box is simply because this soil is moist and the box is cardboard. And over time, that moist soil will break down the cardboard box. And if you mail this, when it gets to the soil lab, this box will be all falling apart. So therefore, I like to put it in a Ziploc bag. As you can see, it fits nicely in the box. We're gonna close the box according to the directions. It does have a little sticky seal here, so it closes. You don't need any tape or anything. And that is our box. The next step would be filling out the name of the sender, so that would be your name, the mailing address, the location, and then field name. So if you have your raised beds labeled, or if you have them like tomato bed versus pepper bed, you would put the name of that raised bed where it says field name, and then crop to be grown. So that may be pepper, tomato, squash, zucchini. You could do generic vegetables, and it will come back making recommendations for all of your vegetables. Then last, what we wrote on the box, we're going to then write on the form, so that way it correlates. This box name, so if we named it box number 1, acres, you would put down square footage, because obviously this is not an acre. And then the crops to be grown, again, could be tomato, vegetable, tomatoes or vegetables, depending on what you've put on your box. And that is how you take a basic soil sample for a raised bed garden.
Hello, I'm Stan West from D&J Nursery. We are located on Highway 231 South, 5 miles below Dothan, Alabama. I, along with my wife and daughter Emily, run D&J Nursery. We offer a full line of plants, fertilizers, compost, and irrigation supplies. Today, I want to talk to you about a couple of different topics. One is like a garden soil or a compost soil. Compost needs to be added to certain garden areas to help build organic matter. Today, we're using a compost of aged cow manure. This material is about 5 years old and has literally just turned into black dirt. We take the cow manure and we mix it with pine bark. This is some aging pine bark that we get, and we mix that, the cow manure, together. We also use some pine wood shavings, such as this, to mix in there to help lighten the soil up a little bit, to help with drainage. We've just started experimenting by adding a little bit of red field sand, and that tends to help get it a little bit more, kind of a little bit more sandier material, a little bit sandier feel. This is our mixed compost. And this is what we sell people to put in gardens and raised beds to plant in. You can plant plants directly into this product. You can plant seeds into it, and it works good. It's not too rich or too hot that it would burn something, but it has enough organic matter to help build the microbes in the soil and help the plants to grow and hold moisture and fertilizer. We recommend adding the compost soil usually at least once a year, tilling it into the soil. It works good if you get it ahead of time in your garden and go ahead and work it in so that it can be working and getting mixed in with the soil that you have. We used to use a product called mushroom compost. Well, mushroom compost around this area has kind of gotten hard to get hold of. The mushroom company went out of business, and so we've had to go back to relying on just the cow manure and pine bark mixture that we make. If you have any questions about compost or adding some type of garden soil or something, you can come see us at D&J Nursery. Now I want to talk to you about some irrigation. We're a drip irrigation dealer. We sell all types of drip irrigation. And today I've got a little demonstration plot here. I put some compost here, kind of like a raised bed or a garden. I planted some peppers in it. And so what we want to do is we want to put drip irrigation on this bed, and I'll show you how simple this is. So what we would do is we'll take drip tape. I want you to look at this real close. This has a dripper made inside of it, right here where my finger is. It's not just a hole. It's a dripper that's made inside of this tape. And we're going to take this tape and we're going to stretch it out down this row of peppers. Lay it down like that. And since we got 2 rows, we could actually, we're going to hook them together, but we could have 20 rows out here, according to how long they are. Now, let me get it turned over here. All right, so we're going to take our tape. We'll cut it right there. We'll take this other piece, we're going to lay it down beside these plants. Now, it's very critical that we use a filter and a pressure regulator on drip tape. This is a filter. This is a screen type filter, and that's just to keep them drippers clean. So we always want to keep a filter hooked on our line. This is a washable filter, can be washed and even replaced if need to, but normally if you just wash them, that's good enough. And so what we would do is take the filter and pressure regulator, we call this a filter assembly, and we're going to hook this to a piece of 3/4 polytubing. This is our header pipe. This is going to go across the end of our rows. And so we're going to put that over that fitting. Take that nut, screw it over to lock it on there. Oh, let's see, I got a punch in my pocket somewhere. There it is. We're going to punch us a hole in this pipe. By the way, this is the wrong size punch. I run out of the other ones. There we go. This is a cutoff valve. Hold on just a minute. There we go. Okay, we got it inserted. We'll take this little nut that's on this valve and we're going to tighten that down. That's going to help seal it on that piece of polytubing. There we go. We're going to take our tape, put it over this fitting. That's going to lock on there. We're going to come down to our next row. We're going to insert another valve. Always keep up with your punches. People lose these real quick, so always keep up with them. Put that other valve in there, like so. I'm going to tighten that up. Slide the drip tape over that. Hold on. Get that fixed right there. We'll cut these valves off for a second. Like that. Okay. On this end of our header pipe, we're going to just take a 1.25 PVC ring, slide it over, kink that pipe. That's going to seal that up. Real simple, inexpensive. Oh, all right. Now, on this end, we're going to take this tape going to cut a piece off about 1 inch long. We're going to open it up like so. And since I don't have but 2 hands, I do that to hold it. We're going to roll this tape back 3 times. 3 times we're going to roll this tape back about 1/4 inch per turn. Slide that over, and that has stopped that up. All right, we're going to come down and do this one. Move that. Cut a piece of tape. Oops. Fluff that out. All right, let's see here. Got that over that. All right, we're gonna lay a little rock right there to hold that down so we get our header pipe straightened out. Normally, you're gonna be doing a lot longer rows than this. You can run drip tape up to about 300 feet and still have it properly water like it's supposed to. Okay, so we got our drip tape hooked up, we got our header pipe hooked up. Only there, and we're going to hook it to water. It's very important to keep that filter on there because this hose was laying on the ground, and if it had been laying here for days or quite a while, bugs and dirt, everything else could have went up in here, and that'll stop that drip tape up. We'll screw that onto that. We're going to open that water up. Hopefully we won't have any leaks. Everything's good. We'll open our tape up. Oops. Got a little leak on this one. I didn't get the tape up on there far enough. So let's see if we can do something about that. All right. Get up on that. See if that'll work now. And it's got a little leak, but anyway, I need to cut that piece of tape. Look at the water dripping right here with my finger. We're going to run this long enough to create a wetted band along this row of peppers. You see the water dripping there? You got that, Emily? Mm-hmm. So imagine this being a garden that had 30 rows on it, and them 30 rows were 50, 60 feet long. That's about 15 to 800 foot of this drip tape on the ground. Normally you can water up to about 2,000 foot of tape off of a simple water faucet, and it's going to put the same amount of water at one end as it does the other. Back up, buddy. Anyway, what you got there? Some compost? All right. And so that's the way we want to water our garden, so we could have, like I say, as many rows as we want along this garden. They could be 100 feet long, 200 feet long, whatever they need to be. Now, if it gets to being over 2,000 foot of tape, we may have to cut some of these valves off and water some rows today and some rows tomorrow. Normally, you'll run drip irrigation like this, probably somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. A lot of times I'll tell people to cut it on at night, let it run all night, and cut it off the next morning. That gives them a good watering. That'll usually hold that plant for 3 or 4 days before you have to water some more. You can also do this right over seed, or where you've planted seed, to keep that ground moist. There's a couple of other options, several other options on watering. Oh, cut these off. I better cut this one off too, or I'm gonna get wet. Well, you just come right up. These are a form of a spray stake. And let's say that you wasn't using the drip tape and you wanted to water a different form or fashion, you can come in, punch these holes, get wet like that. Okay, I'm gonna put that one right there. That one's called a shrubler. I'll show you how it works in just a second. Come on, get in there. All right, and this is called a spectrum. All right, so let's cut our water back on. Okay, this is a shrubler. These can go in pots or in the ground. If they're not high enough, take you something like a piece of 1/2-inch PVC pipe and put it in the ground and stick that down in it to get it up. What's so good about these type spray stakes is they're adjustable. I can turn that down where it's putting out a smaller area, or I can open it up where it puts out more. It's not putting out near as far because I got a 15-pound regulator on that, and I'm supposed to have something bigger. All right, let's look at this spectrum right here. Okay, look at her. It's wetting me all the way over here. As I say, I don't want it that big. I turn it down. I'm only doing to here. I do just a little bit, kind of like a bubbler. And I can open it up, and it'll throw. It's throwing out to my hand here. So, we've talked about compost. There's several different types of materials that you can make your own compost with, whether it be the cow manure, take old grass clippings, old leaves, let them pile up. Any type of soft wood like pine or cedar or cypress is okay. It's not recommended to use hardwood material unless it's been piled up and rotted for a pretty good while. But anyway, on the compost, you probably need to add fertilizer to help the plants to grow. And on the drip irrigation, this, like I say, this is just one form that we showed you, or two forms that you can water a garden, water your plants. If you want to water pots, whatever you want to do, you can. We pretty much got an application to fit your needs. If you would like to, give us a call at D&J Nursery. Our telephone number is 334-677-3866, or you can email us at stan@djnursery.com. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Helen Sue Kemp. I'm a wiregrass master gardener, and we are here at the DABG, which is Dothan Area Botanical Gardens demonstration garden. I've been working here since 2002. And I have taken care of all of the plants essentially myself with a few helpers. The gardens actually started in 1998, but the only thing they really produced first was a 100-pound pumpkin. From then on, they started making rows of different plants, and it was really, really difficult. By 2003, we were just inundated with weeds, and it was very, very hard. So about 2004, I decided to start partitioning off different areas of the garden so that we would have some square beds and some rectangular beds. We had some triangles, something to give it a little bit more interest, for one thing. And they were only just landscape timbers. We used conveyor belts between the different rows of plants. That was successful, except when it rained, they curled up and then they dried funny, and it really was kind of dangerous. But it did help with some of the weeding. So my big problem was weeds more than anything. I'd start at one end, get to the other end, and the first end would be just full of them again. The area here is about 100 feet by 40 feet. So that gives you about 4,000 square feet to plant in. After I started all of that, I worked for several years planting, trying all different types of vegetables, and it really has been a wonderful experience. The vegetables go to the Wiregrass Area Food Bank, and we have done up to as much as 2,400 pounds a year, but with the changes that we've made, we've actually lowered the amount of produce that we've able to produce. First of all, when you take in some lettuce and it only weighs a pound, but the bag is huge, versus a small bag of potatoes that might weigh 20 pounds, poundage is really difficult to go by. But it feeds people, and that's what's important. There are certain vegetables I'd rather not plant, so I don't plant them. It's very, very time consuming to take care of a garden of this size. At any rate, in 2015, I finally had just about had it. I went into the board directors and I said, I can't do it anymore unless you change it. So we decided to change to raised beds. And I've been a very happy soul ever since. It's so much easier. It's amazing how different the weeding is. That's probably the biggest difference, except on the ground, you know, on the floor part. But the actual beds themselves, you can't beat it. It's nothing better than that. One of the negatives with the wood beds is that the wasps like to form their little nests and hang on the thing. So there's nothing worse than approaching a bed and standing there and suddenly zap, they get you at the back of your knee, because that's right about the level at where they are. And they are horrible. So they have to be checked all the time. The brick ones that we have, though, don't seem to have that problem. There's some negatives with bricks, but I like them a lot. They're smaller. The wooden ones that we do have are two different types. One of them has corrugated metals on the sides, and those are fine. They do not have a lip, though, to sit on, whereas the other ones, which are solely wood, have a shelf built onto the top of them, and that's nice to be able to sit down and do a little weeding on the sides, particularly for an elderly person such as I. The brick beds, I don't have a problem with any of them, except they're smaller, so therefore your production is less. Now, as for irrigation, what we have tried here, we first started out with tubing all around through the bed. It was not really successful. It just did not seem to water enough. You had to be running for a long time. So we changed things, and what we formed was a long tube down the center with smaller tubing going to strategic parts, the corners and in the center. So the four corners actually have emitters, which are 90-degree emitters, and they sprinkle up, and then the center ones are 180 degrees. So therefore it gets a good balance. You don't need to have them too long. We probably run them when it's really, really hot for about 15 minutes in a day, simply because of the heat and the fact that being a raised bed, they will dry out faster than something that would be in the ground. However, that's great. We put mulch on the top of the beds. That helps protect some of the moisture. And we have not had a lot of problems. I've really been successful with just about everything except tomatoes, and that that's a Mother Nature deal in which she's getting too hot at the wrong time for the tomato. However, I love to grow carrots. Potatoes do well. These nice carrots right here, and a lot of other different vegetables. Peppers do beautifully well. I've done peas. I've done all different types, Swiss chard, kale, and nothing seems to really die. I don't seem to have a bad problem with that. About August, you start getting an awful lot of bugs, but that's just Mother Nature here working. Now, as for the beds, I plant pretty much 1 or 2 types of vegetable per bed, and I like to incorporate some flowers. Actually, I've got some running beans going up some trellises and things like that. It does help to incorporate different things in your garden. It makes it visually far nicer. The other disadvantage with wooden ones versus the brick is that soil does start to escape between the areas where the 2 boards perhaps were together. So you do have to constantly add soil. You have to change the soil some. For the most part, it is a matter of just keeping track of it and watching it. There are times that I like the soil to be a little bit lower. For instance, if you're growing lettuce in the cooler times, which is when it grows best here, you can then cover it easily if it's lower down. And in the cold days, when we do have a few of them that are really cold, the cover sheets will protect it. So there's advantages to having it low and advantages to having it up high. So you have to think about what you're growing. That's important. We have flooring in this particular garden that I'm not crazy about. It's small little pebbles, little tiny rocks. And the biggest disadvantage is the children pick them up and then throw them in the beds or throw them at each other. So that's not good in a public garden. In a private garden, it might be fine. They're a little bit harder to walk on at times. It can be, your back can get tired from it, or your legs. I do not know the perfect solution. Perhaps if it was grass and just mowed, might even be better. And edged. That's a lot of edging on a lot of beds, but you might be able to figure out something that you could put next to it to keep it from the weeds going up. But to mow it, I think would have been a better solution in this instance. This bed is not completely planted yet. This half of it I'm going to be putting in cucumber seed and letting that. I'll have a rack so that they can climb on it. This other half, though, I'm devoting to tomatoes. And one thing that's really important is if you particularly have different varieties of tomatoes and you want to keep track of them, a good label is important. We use blinds and mark them. You can use all kinds of different things. Wood tends to deteriorate, so it's better to use something that is not going to deteriorate. When we originally started with these beds, we started with about 2 feet or 1.5 feet of sand, just normal sand. And then we started to put organic material into it. I found that it wasn't quite the right mixture. And I did a soil sample for particular beds that I wanted to grow tomatoes. I sent it off, they told me what to add. I added it, and boom, I had a bunch of wonderful tomatoes that next year. It was really a positive thing to do, very positive. It's difficult when you have lots of beds, because then you have other things that have different types of requirements. In general, a pretty basic one is what's necessary, a basic fertilizer. And you need, for tomatoes, of course, you've got to have something that has some calcium in it and magnesium so that they can avoid some of the problems that tomatoes do have.
One thing we always try to do is include a little testimonial where someone has actually done what we're talking about. So in this time of self-isolation, we have decided we were going to do some raised beds at our house this year. And rather than spend a bunch of money, we're working with what we already had. We had these two rusted out cattle troughs and a couple of rusted out and we had a couple of rusted out buckets and wash tubs And then we just added to it with a couple of plastic containers. So I'll get Sydney over here to tell you what we did and how we did it and how he set our irrigation up. And I'm excited about this irrigation. No more hose dragging. Go ahead.
All right, well, what we did, I had 2 mineral tubs, and I put some bricks down in the bottom of them that had holes in them. Then I put some straw in the bottom as a filler in all of these. And then I filled them up about halfway with the straw, and then we got our dirt from Stan at DJ's Nursery, and put probably about a foot, 12 inches of soil on top. Of course, it rained yesterday and packed it down. But anyway, then I got the irrigation. I got it hooked up and got it running on them. And I got it on. I hooked it up, buried the pipe in the ground, and come up here at this tank here. And then I got it set on a timer that it'll run about 20 minutes right now, and we can set it for ever how long we need to.
Okay, show we have a little L-shaped setup. So he did.
Well, right here I teed off. She had these over here, so I just teed off the pipe here, run another piece of pipe, and then put the emitters. We haven't got this one planted yet, but we'll put them wherever we need them. But it's real easy to do, real simple.
Well, we've taken you from the simplest of beds all the way up to this Cadillac of raised beds that Mr. James Currington, Randy Currington, and Mr. Victor Koon built earlier this spring on the Vivian B. Adams School site. We will be able to bring you more on those and the how-to of especially doing this great tunnel house type bed later. But I really want to express my gratitude to all of our presenters, to Mr. James Currington, to David Koon, Lucy Edwards, everyone that worked together, Stan West, Ms. Kemp, everyone that worked together to bring this information to you. At the end, we will have a list of their emails right here. And if you have specific questions for these presenters, I know they'll be happy to answer your questions. We will have more to come. Hopefully our next meeting, whether it be in person or by video, and sounds like most likely by video, we're going to talk about the actual planting of our beds. One of the things we do have available is a calendar. Many of you at our meeting saw this earlier and were able to get a copy. This has been written expressly for our area. It shows the different planting dates, what you need to plant, and gives you a place to write information so you can keep up with what you're doing. And if you are interested in one of these calendars at no cost to you, if you will email me, Susan Owens, my email will be listed at the end of the presentation. I will get one to you as quickly as I can. Thank you so much, and we will be in touch later.